You are now listening to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. We preserve the history and sport of hunting through curious conversation and action-packed hunts, as well as offering you tips and strategy for more successful hunts. Hey guys, welcome to the Successful Seasons series for the Hunter's Advantage podcast, where the whole goal of this series is to break down the tactics and reasons that folks are consistently successful on harvesting big whitetails, whether on public land or on private. We're going to dig into some of the highlights of these folks' successful seasons, and then talk about some of the mistakes they made and how they would correct them. If you want to learn from some absolute whitetail killers from across the country, this is the series for you. Let's get into Successful Seasons. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. This is episode number 139. We're continuing our Successful Seasons series on this episode, but today we're joined by Noah Gould. Thanks for jumping on with us, man.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to fix my tag right there, but got it now. But
oh, there you go. You go. You got to get the handle in there.
Yeah,
you can't lose the opportunity to get a few followers if they want to see the socials. But anyways, thanks for jumping on with us, man. Really appreciate it. I think I described it to you a little bit before the episode started. Jake's been on a few of these, but we're doing a Successful Season series. So we're walking through postseason of what all went into a successful season of last year, and talking a little bit about the tips, the tactics that allow people to continuously harvest really big bucks across the country. And it looks like you had a great season. We're going to dig into some of that on the as far as the hunting side, but I wanted to start maybe a little bit more high level. Can you you did a really good job giving us a background in the email about yourself. Yeah. Can you basically give that same background to the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So grew up in Wisconsin my whole life, pretty much. Born and raised in Ohio, I guess, until I moved to Wisconsin. And that was when my hunting passion really took place. My family's got a 100-year-old farm here in northeastern Wisconsin. So I grew up bow hunting that probably around the age of 10. And then just got introduced into food plotting, habitat management through my family. And on that farm. And then over the past 2 years, we've been buying property kind of towards western Wisconsin, kind of extending our reach that way where there's better hunting. I mean, you got like Buffalo County, Trempealeau, Jackson, all those big buck counties. And that's kind of where I've been focusing my hunting tactics over in that area lately. But yeah, I do public hunting, private, you name it, I do it.
What's your favorite?
It's if you would have asked me before this year, I would have said I liked public hunting, just because I guess I had never shot anything too giant, like a lot of 130 class to 140s. And then my most memorable deer was definitely on public. I shot that probably 3 years ago. And it was my first first morning of like a 5-day trip over in western Wisconsin. Shot him on that first sit. And that was like my most memorable deer. I've never worked harder for a deer other than that one. Until this year, I'd done a lot of the habitat improvements on our new farm, and I was able to shoot a 160. So that is tied, I would say. But I like hunting private as well. But hunting wise, public, but like the whole management side is what I like the most about hunting.
It's funny, Jake. So my dad used to work at like a farming equipment manufacturer, and there was this guy that was his boss from Wisconsin. And I know people are from Wisconsin because just how they say the state name is just completely different from the way I say it. Yeah, we took this guy hunting in Oklahoma, and like he was just trying to get a doe, Jake, over on the Ponderosa. And like 3 mature does ran by him, and we were like, dude, why didn't you shoot? And he said, shoot. He said, those things are as big as my damn Labrador. He said, those were fawns. And I was like, dude, they're not like Wisconsin deer. Those are big, 100 pounds is a big doe. So he let them all go because he thought they were all fawns.
That's the thing. Like that's one thing I kind of noticed. Like branching off into Kansas this year is like literally the deer in like southern Oklahoma versus just the deer even in southern Kansas is like night and day difference. Like the tracks, like on the edges of these of the soybean fields and all that stuff, they were massive. Like I it was either during like the summer or during like the opening weekend, like in September or something. I found this track and I literally put like a Wild Game Innovation trail camera like down next to it, and it was dang near the same size. And I was like, we're hunting cows out here. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, what do you got to shoot, like 800 grain arrows up there, Noah, to kill one?
I shoot a pretty heavy arrow setup. I want to say it's like 600 grains, but nothing too crazy. More shot location, and then for my rifle, I use a pretty good rifle caliber. I use a 300 Win Mag for deer up here, but it's probably pretty average. I don't know what you guys use.
30-06,
300.
30-06.
Yeah. So do you have you hunted any deer not in the Midwest? None of these big cow looking deer? Any of the small southern deer?
I've done Missouri, like south central Missouri, western Missouri, northern Missouri. That's about as south as I've hunted. But even there is definitely a difference in body size. I shot one down there with my bow last January, and I mean that thing was maybe 160 pounds dressed out. But I don't know if that's for you guys, if that's a big deer.
I was going to say, what are you bragging or something? That's a big one.
So I don't know if we already covered this because like my mind's been kind of everywhere today. How close are you to Buffalo County?
So the farm that we just bought in April is 220 acres. That one's probably 5 miles as the crow flies from the Buffalo County line over into Trimpolo. So it's kind of a hidden gem. Like, it's still the same type of deer, less bluffs, less steep. So it's a lot easier to hunt actually to kill the bucks if you have them on your farm. Mm-hmm. But the genetics are still really good there.
I got you. So is all the hype true about Buffalo County? Because according to the Boone and Crockett like record book and stuff, like that's the place to be.
It used to be, I think. There's still pockets hidden in there, like in the northwestern and northern part of the county. A lot of like the big tracts that are owned there produce a lot of really nice deer. And then kind of sprinkled in there, there's really good neighborhoods around there. And the further east you go over into Trimpolo and Jackson County, the hunting stays just as good, but you just have to find like a really good QDM block, and you can consistently see a 160, 170 every year on camera to chase after.
Heck yeah. Can't complain about that.
Yeah.
No, not one bit. So I saw in the email you sent us when we asked you a little bit more clarifying questions, you said that you guys, you and your father own over like 900 acres. Can you kind of break across Wisconsin? Can you break that down into how big of parcels to like how big to how small in the range that you have there?
Yeah. So our main farm was 650 acres in northeastern Wisconsin, and it's not a great area to hunt. I mean, usually on a good year, we'll have like a 140, maybe a 150 max to chase, and then like a couple 130s and 120s in there. But for track size, that's the largest. But we sold off 100 acres. We're currently doing that right now, trying to do a 1031 exchange to buy another 140 acre farm over in that Trimpolo area to add on to our farm over there. So that's 140 acres is what we'll be buying. And then, so we got a 220, 140, and 550.
Gotcha. Do you see a lot of small acreage pieces? Like, I know you talk about some of the habitat work that you do for plans and stuff. Like, What's the smallest like piece of land you guys will do a plan on?
I just did a 15-acre plan for a dude, but he butts up to like 600 acres of privately owned land. And I guess they QD him pretty hardcore. So he wanted this 15 acres laid out as good as it possibly could have been. And the only thing with that farm is it was all field and ag coming in. So I recommended he had to plant either some switch or miscanthus so he could get in and out and have that grow up as soon as possible so he can start hunting it efficiently without spooking them. in the mornings going into hunt. But usually like 15 to 20 acres is a pretty small tract that I'll map up.
I only ask because I've got a buddy that has he's got a 20-acre piece in North Texas, and similar to what you were saying, he's surrounded by a big block of like 400 acres of privately owned timber, and he's like the only ag around. And he was like, "Well, what should I do to create more bedding on this place?" I was like, "Dude, 98% of the stuff around here is bedding. Like there's no food." And so we can talk a little bit more about that later, but since we're kind of alluding to it here, can you talk a little bit about your role in building habitat plans, and then kind of how you got started as far as designing layouts for like deer hunting farms?
Yeah. So I guess I started out just messing around on our main farms that we have, really doing food plots, kind of learning how to get them to grow as good as I can. And then from there, kind of designing out like stand locations, blind locations, the best entrance, exit routes to those plots, all keeping in mind like wind direction. So I started doing that just on our main farms since I was like 15 years old. And then over the past couple of years, I started doing it for some friends. I did a 350-acre farm up in northeastern Wisconsin as well for a buddy, and I went through with a logger, cleared out like 15 acres of oaks, added food plots, and that was like the first farm that I had officially designed out. It was pretty cool because they were able to shoot a 160 the next year off of it, and they had never even shot like a 120 off of it. So it was pretty cool putting the pieces together. But recently I started working for a dude, or I guess helping him out, design some maps out, take over some of his workload. And basically you reach out to us and I'll do an in-person or over the phone consultation with you, and then decide what's the best route for your property and making the habitat better, whether it's selective harvest, food, better entrance or hunting stand locations, pretty much everything that you see like Jeff Sturgis or Brett Smith, any of the Don Higgins, anything they're doing is basically what I'm teaching as well, but with my own kind of spin off to it.
Gotcha.
Because everybody has their own ideas on what works best and stuff. So,
right. So are you pretty tree savvy? Like, you know what trees what for the most part?
Pretty tree savvy, but as you go down further south, I don't do as much like recommendations with like non-invasives and invasives because I don't know as much about it.
No, the reason I say that is because the only trees I know is like a pine tree and then like an oak tree. And don't ask me if it's a white oak, a bur oak. I have no earthly idea, but I am trying to get better at that. So how long did it take you to like know your stuff?
Well, I guess for like the red and white oaks, I started out like when I was probably like 14 or 15, kind of learning the difference between those. And that was always easy just because we have a ton of them around. And you can think of it as like acorns, like the Native Americans shot their bow and arrow with, and the arrow's pointed, right? Mm-hmm. So the leaves on a red oak are pointed versus a white oak. We used like muskets and shit back then. So they were rounded. So the leaves on the white oaks are more rounded. That's how you can tell like between a red and white oak. But for everything else, it just takes time. You have to like want to learn about it. And it kind of comes easy if you love doing it and like to learn more about their habitat.
Right. Cause like at deer camp and stuff, if you get around like an older group, they're like, oh yeah, you know, what tree were you sitting in? It's just like one that has leaves. I don't know, you know, it sounds bad. And it's just like, I want to be that guy. Like I want to be a good hunter for sure. But like when it's all said and done, like I want to be a good woodsman. Like, when it comes down to it. And it's just like, you know, it's a process, but in all honesty, I'm an idiot. So it's going to be a slow process.
Yeah, and everybody has a learning curve, and there's a process for everybody that might be different. But for me, it was just kind of looking through books and different biology books and reading about trees and stuff and bark and everything. But you just learn more as you start to do it and dive into it.
Yeah,
Man, you can't tell a chick that on a date. What do you like to do? I like to read about bark and trees.
I don't know. I had a few chicks in field botany that really was into
that was their
stuff,
jam.
So, yeah. Anyways,
that's awesome. So what do you enjoy the most about the habitat improvement stuff? Is it, a lot of people do it for a lot of different reasons. Maybe some people want to improve the deer hunting on their property just so they can watch them. Some people want to kill bigger bucks. Some people just want to see more deer. What is it that you enjoy most about being able to lay out these plans and do habitat improvements?
I guess it depends if I'm talking about my farm. I just like to see the impact I've made on the deer herd. Maybe see bigger bucks and obviously shoot nicer bucks. But for other people, I do it just to like see them shoot nice deer. I mean, that's like the main goal in the end is to have them successfully turn their farm into a farm that is producing deer of the caliber they want to shoot. And certain areas can definitely do that, but other areas might not be as good genetically, and you just have to accept what you can shoot realistically in different areas. But I would say probably just shooting nice deer and then actually seeing the impact that you're making in the deer herd.
Yeah, that's cool. We don't get to do a lot of that because we don't own any property. We have a bunch of lease properties. So doing TSI or planting a bunch of food or doing anything that has to do with cutting or planting trees is not going to happen for us.
Yeah.
So what are some of the most common things that, like, you go into a farm, you walk the place? What are some of the things that you see people doing the most wrong? And what are some of the easiest improvements that most people can make to their farms? Is it stand locations or what do you got?
Probably just, stand locations and access. I mean, just because your access might be easy for one stand might not make it the best access for that stand. A lot of people don't realize that. They'll be like, oh, but it's just 200 yards down this field edge. It's super easy to slip into in the morning. But not only should you not be slipping in the morning on a field edge, spooking the deer off the field, then coming back your way to bed, but you got to come through the bedding in the mornings early, get set up and catch them before they even know that you're set up. So access is a big thing, how they access their property. And then you have to create sanctuaries for the deer that they feel safe in all year long, that your wind's not going into, that you're not going into to check cameras or anything. Sanctuaries are a big key to keep the deer herd healthy and stay on your property all year long.
Good point. I was thinking, I was typing out some notes there because we were talking about just a few minutes earlier about one of my buddies that has 20 something acres in North Texas. Like eight of those acres were planted in like oats and winter wheat and kind of just a big mix of different things. And on the far western part of the property, there was a great stand location that you could just walk up into from a bunch of thick grass and get up in and not disturb the field at all. He had another stand location along a creek that was way to the east side of the property. And one of his buddies was saying he had some really good hunts there. And the first question that I had for him, I was like, how do you ever get into that stand? Like, one, because you have to walk across all your other stands and all of your food to get to it. So not like you're going to get caught one of two ways. One, when you're walking in, all those deer are going to walk past the path that you've walked in. And then two, it's like, it was just like really, it was super weird access, but the way this piece laid out, I just didn't see a way where you could hunt that into the field. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I don't know. That one kind of perplexed me a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes an area might be really good, but it's just you can't get at it. And I'd recommend just staying out of that most times, unless you have, I mean, there's certain situations, if you got a deer pegged on camera coming out in the same spot every night, and you know that if you slip in for an evening sit or something, you're going to spook them off the food in the evening, that you better shoot them that first sit in. Otherwise, you've got one chance at that deer. And there's been scenarios that me and my buddies have hunted public or private and decided to do sits like that. And you just have to be like right on them when they come out. That way, you kill them the first sit in a spot like that. Otherwise, you're kind of ruining the property for a little while at least.
I called that spot like risk it for the biscuit.
Yeah.
Like this is a good spot because his buddy was telling me, or one of my buddies was like, yeah, but you can have some really, really good hunts in here. You know, one time I had like 40 deer within bow range, and I was like, I'm not doubting that you could have good hunts in here. I was like, but you're one doe catching a track for away from losing anything mature within a few hundred yards. So, yeah, I agree. You could do that, but it's like, that's definitely a very, very few and far between on scenarios I'd be willing to do something like that.
Yeah, most of the times that we've tried it out, it does not work. That deer will come out, and sometimes they just have like a sixth sense that they know you're there in an area that they feel so safe in, and you have to take everything into consideration when you're doing that, like thermals, wind direction, the trail you walked in on. It all has to play to your favor for that one sit. Otherwise, it's probably not worth it 9 times out of 10.
I got a question though. Are you a moon guy?
I've definitely considered different things when it comes to moon. But do I follow the red moon phase and everything? Not necessarily. I'm not going to go out and buy the guide for the red moon phase.
Right.
But I do think that it could play an effect with deer movement. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, because the only reason I say that is because I haven't dug too deep into it, but it seems like so on this private piece I hunt, there, like I got 2 stands in there. One's just like maybe 50 yards tucked up into a timber, and then a few hundred yards away, I have a blind kind of along the edge of this field, and I don't know what it was, but it seems like every single time there was a full moon or something. And the only reason I knew or I paid attention to it was a full moon because if I sat in the blind, it seemed like I could shoot 30 minutes after it got dark. And so I was like, it seems like I see more deer on a full moon in the evening. That's just what it seemed. I mean, I know this is all anecdotal, but I just didn't know if like you had any experience with that.
No, I know a lot of people do follow that moon guide pretty good, but it's just never something that I've actually put into place. I look at more like barometric pressure and cold fronts versus anything. Mm-hmm. And then just like the patterns that I have on the deer. I mean, I'm running like 40 different cell cams, so I kind of know how the deer
what's your bill a month?
Pretty good.
I bet. I had 2 cell cams this season finally, and every single time it was like $40 come out of my bank account. And I was like, damn it! Like I just hate spending money on myself. But then again, I can go buy a bag of corn, and that's basically it for the whole month worth of cell cams. So it's whatever. Just take your licks.
So staying on kind of in the vein of the habitat improvement stuff is. How would you go about? I know you talked about Miscanthus a little bit earlier, and maybe switchgrass. How would you go about creating bedding on a property with limited timber? And I think a good example of this is Jake, your place where you hunt quite a bit. Is there's a very few amounts of timber, but you have a very big piece of field that could be utilized for some sort of bedding in between 2 giant blocks of timber. So I'm just wondering, is that something that you guys will do, is try to create bedding areas just with grass?
Yeah. So the 140 acre farm that we're buying currently, we close on that in March. That's probably 50-50 ag to timber, which is more ag than I'd typically like to see in a property, or a larger sized farm anyways. And the goal that I had when looking at that was the neighborhood. It was a great neighborhood, but I knew that I could do a lot to that property to make it better and make the deer bed on the property. So my idea was I was adding about 15 acres of switchgrass bedding, but the deer won't want just switchgrass, right? Because it's kind of a monoculture. There's no browse for them there. There's not a ton of overhead cover in switchgrass. So that's why like diversity pockets planted within those switchgrass areas will really allow the deer to want to bed in those locations. So like adding conifers like spruce or red cedar into those pockets with maybe like raspberry bushes or red oak or dogwood, any of that stuff added within that switchgrass will make it more desirable and better bedding for those deer. But getting a good switchgrass stand is pretty tough if you don't know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're kind of just tossing money out because it's kind of pricey for an acre of switchgrass. It's like $100.
Dang.
But yeah, it's definitely a good thing to be able to do that stuff with the switch, but you just have to do it right and correct.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is powered by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. Out on a Limb is a family-owned company based right here in Oklahoma that makes tree stands, saddle platforms, climbing sticks, and so much more.
Christian, I have a quick question.
What's that?
What bites down harder, a hippo or an alligator?
No idea.
It's a trick question. The Ridge Runner 2.0 bites harder than both of them. But all jokes aside, we use these products all across the land on public or private. These help us get into any tree we want and hunt where the deer actually are.
Most men go to the grocery store for their meat, but these products help you go to God's grocery store. I have used the Out on a Limb Ridge Runner 2.0 and the Shakar sticks for the last few years hunting public land bucks, and I've actually shot several bucks out of this setup. If you want to support the podcast and get some Out on a Limb equipment, make sure to go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 for 10% off at checkout. Once again, if you want to support the podcast, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA10 at checkout for 10% off. Now let's get back to the podcast.
When you all like either go and like select cut or clear cut, or you plant that tall grass, do you all try to do that in a way that it's not super easy for like predators like coyotes or something to somewhat make it easy for him to like find the newly dropped fawns? Because I heard something either on a podcast or something saying that like if you only have like a strip of timber or a little block of timber, something that it doesn't take a lot of grid searching for a coyote to run up and down, like that could be pretty bad for like the fawn drop.
I guess that's not something that I normally consider. Usually in our area, the coyotes aren't too crazy. A lot of people run dogs for them. I hunt them as well. So they're not crazy. And most of the time they're going after rabbits and pheasants because we have plenty of those around.
I gotcha.
But that's not something that I think of too much just because we do a pretty good job of controlling the coyotes around us. But the more north you go in Wisconsin, the more wolves there are. So that's something that you definitely have to consider going more north.
Since you opened up that can of worms, have you ever went wolf hunting?
No, I've never gone. I've seen them a couple times in northern Wisconsin driving down the roads, but I've never seen them while hunting or anything. That's
something I want to do. Like if I could put one thing in a bucket list, like besides going to Alaska and hunting something, I would want to go to like Idaho or just somewhere and just see one of those big old dog looking things. I want to hunt one pretty bad.
Yeah, there's plenty of them in Wisconsin, but I guess the state doesn't want as many harvested as we have been in the past. But I think they're back on the endangered species list here, so we're not technically allowed to hunt them. Yeah, so they had opened up a hunt, I think it was last year, for the wolves, and they had a 200 wolf quota, and it was kind of like they gave out 500 people the tags for the 200 wolves. And that first day, they killed maybe like 110. So they had it open the second day as well. So all 500 people went out, or 1,000, whatever it was. And they shot like 300 or 200 wolves over the quota. That's how many wolves there are in Wisconsin, but nobody wants to admit that.
So there's
an issue with the DNR and the amount of wolves here, but
I bet. Huh. So do like certain farmers have like a pretty big issue with that?
It's mostly northern Wisconsin. There's like no deer in northern Wisconsin.
Oh,
You go
really?
up there and the wolves are just really overrun. The winters are so harsh on the deer too. I mean, you're getting like 2-3 feet of snow in some areas.
Really?
Then you add on the wolves, and there's not much of a deer herd in in like the northern third of the state.
I getcha. Huh.
That's kind of nuts.
Yeah,
That
it's
is.
pretty,
That
it's
is.
pretty
awesome.
crazy.
So like after this question, I'll get off topic, but relatively like how many like is it like the size of like a Great Dane? Because I've never seen one in real life.
It kind of depends. I had one on camera this last year. It was probably the size of like a German Shepherd,
Okay.
and it's like a noticeable difference from a coyote. But there's timber wolves, and then there's gray wolves. The gray wolves are typically a lot bigger than those timber wolves. And those are the ones that were introduced from Yellowstone.
I getcha.
So those are the bigger type of wolves.
Yeah. I don't know how long ago it was, but I seen this picture on Facebook, and it was like either the bucket of a tractor lifted up, or it was hanging on a tree limb or something. But it was a comparison between a wolf and then a dog, and then or no, not a dog, a coyote. And then ever since then, I was like, that kind of got me hooked. I was like, I want to get one.
Yeah, it's you can get them up to like 180, 200 pounds, but usually the timber wolves are like in that 120-pound range, 100-pound range.
I getcha.
That's hype. So I got a couple more questions on the bedding subject before I move on from it. Let's say hypothetically, because I know a guy that has a situation, and I might as well get like a free land consulting while I'm on this podcast. Let's say somebody's got like 8 acres of like contiguous food, right? And there's some variety of foods in that. There's some soybeans mixed into it. There's maybe like a deadly dozen of just regular greens into it. Would you consider in a big block of food like that? I would see that access could be a problem, right? Because deer can come out from anywhere, and you could really only slip in from one side before you're starting to disturb it if it's set up that way. Would you consider putting any switchgrass or miscanthus or anything in between that plot to kind of break it up into different smaller plots to hunt in?
Yeah, for sure. I would. One of the first things that I'd look at is like edge feathering. Whether that's switchgrass around the outside of your plot or field, trees dropped around the outside. That just makes sure that the deer want to like pop out into the food source without just like looking out and seeing there's nothing in there. They have to come out. They have to come out and feed. That's a big thing that I do first. And then like just dividing that up into smaller sections definitely reduces the pressure for the deer. I mean, they don't want to have 40 deer packed into one food plot. They'd rather have 10 here, 5 here, 7 here. They'd rather have it broken up from my experience. So maybe, breaking it up would be a big thing. And then it all depends how many deer you have in your area. And every property is different. And I look at every property with a different view, just because like deer herd, the amount of deer, hunting pressure, it all plays a role into that. I mean, if you had a 8-acre food plot in northeastern Wisconsin where there's a 40 everywhere, you might only have nocturnal deer on that food source, versus if you had a 1/4-acre plot in the timber somewhere, you'll probably have a lot more daylight action there. And it's all dependent on the area and property.
That's a good point. I mean, the this property that we're talking about, 7 or 8 acres of ag in the middle of it, like surrounded by giant big blocks of timber, and basically the only ag around. And so there is a 2 or 3 acre block of timber on this 20-acre property. And you hear Don Higgins and other property management folks talking about it all the time. If deer are bedding on your property, the likelihood of you killing them are way higher than if they're bedded on somebody else's property, even if they're bordering it. Would you consider going into a piece of unhuntable timber like that 2 or 3 acre and doing some TSI to get some of that new growth in the bottom of it, to get some of those deer at least bedding into your property?
As long as it's in a desirable location. Obviously, I don't know what your predominant wind direction is down there. What is it?
We got a lot of south winds.
A lot of south. So I guess if that it all depends on access. If you're not crop dusting or going in or that.
I mean, I'm
that
crop
area,
dusting, but it's from the burritos from the gas station on the way in.
Yeah, it all depends on your wind direction, like and how you access. If it's in an area that's not bothered by you, then I would definitely recommend going in there and doing TSI and improving the bedding. Because even if you can get just one buck or one doe group there on that bedding area, then that just brings more deer to that area as well. To whether it's rut or late season, they kind of group up too. So doing that would help as long as it's not in an area where you're going to blow it out every time you hunt.
Yeah. What's good about this area is it's on the far, what would that be? Far northeastern corner. And it's basically a block of timber that gets untouched otherwise. You can't hunt in it. It's too thick to walk in and set stand locations. And you'd have to trim too many shooting lanes to be able to hunt in there. And it's terrible access to get into that timber. So I'm like, you're already not utilizing the timber to hunt. So why not make that bedding that borders pretty much directly next to your food?
Yeah, I for sure would then in that scenario. It would just be like you said, if you're not doing anything with it now, you might as well try to make it better bedding, even if you're not going to hunt it.
That's a good point. So do you consider, if you can see through it, do you consider that bedding, or does it need to be way thicker for you to consider that bedding? I know some deer will bed in it regardless if you can see through it, but what would be ideal bedding in like a timber situation?
It's all dependent on the time of year. I mean, if you look at Wisconsin in summer or any warm state in summer, when the deer have their velvet, I tend to see them in the open oak country where there's not a ton of ground level vegetation. They're just getting that shade all day long, and they can withstand being in an area like that in bachelor groups just because their testosterone hasn't kicked off yet. But once they shed their velvet, then they definitely like to be in that thicker stuff. And then come late season again, they'd actually prefer a south-facing slope that with open oaks, that they're absorbing the sunlight up all day long on that south-facing slope. But for the most part, you definitely want thicker cover because that's going to be the time period of the year that you're going to be hunting them is like September through December, January. They're going to want to be in that thick cover for the most part.
That's a good point. How do you go about advising people on TSI or any timber improvement? Do you use that something you put in a lot of your plans to create more bedding?
Yeah. The way I do it, and there's a similar guy doing it out there, Brett Smith, is he makes sure that as long as it's available, that the timber source there, he puts in like select cuts or clear cuts on a lot of the properties. So it helps pay for the consultation. That way you're kind of getting my information for free, and it's providing better bedding and food and a layout of your property without you actually having to pay for it too much, because you'll get a lot of that money back from the timber harvest, and your property is just going to improve tremendously. But in a scenario like that, it all depends what kind of vegetation is around. If there's a lot of invasives around there, and that's just going to take over when you cut, you might not want to cut. Otherwise, you can, when you cut, take all the, and in a scenario like that where you have like 2-3 acres, you're going to have to do it yourself, right? You're not, no loggers
Right.
going to want to come in and do that for 17 trees or whatever it is. So I'd recommend, it's all dependent, hinge cutting and planting different species in there as well to try to add something that's not there, different diversity. But usually I try not to recommend just hinge cutting because that's like a lot of maintenance to keep up with. Not a lot of people talk about that, but because after 3 years, you're going to have a really overgrown thick area, and then it's going to start getting shaded out by all the new growth in like 3 to 5 years. So you got to recut that new growth down and then keep the access trails and entrance routes in those bedding areas clear, so the deer keep using it consistently. But it's all dependent. I don't know what I would do in that scenario. Probably try hinge cutting and planting some new trees that would be beneficial to have.
What's the hinge cutting like for people that want to know a little bit more about that? What's the kind of high level technique for a semi-pro hinge cutter that's just starting out?
So basically, the first thing I would do if you want to try it, go get a nice chainsaw, go get the right equipment for it, helmet, ear protection, the chaps, so you don't like cut your leg off or anything like that. Yeah. And then
don't listen to this podcast. You're fine.
Yeah. And then for sure I would get like a hinge cutting tool. So basically it's like a bar that can extend out to like 12 feet or whatever it is. And you kind of push the tree whatever way you want it to fall. That way you're kind of avoiding kickbacks when the tree gets cut. But basically you're taking the chainsaw, you're cutting horizontally at like hip to chest high, and you're going to fell the tree, but keep it attached to the base. So that way the tree's still technically alive. It's still getting the nutrients from the roots. And it's just going to sprout out from there. And that way it creates browse at deer level. And then you're allowing sunlight to come down and create new regen with the sunlight to the ground now.
Now, you typically only want to cut like the non-favored trees, like maybe like a locust tree or something like that, and you want to leave your good oaks and stuff. Is that right? Or do you want to? Because I know, or I've heard on other podcasts that one of the main problems with hinge cutting that other people or just like regular landowners have is they'll just go through whacking a chainsaw about everything, and then sooner or later it's just like, well, you just now cut down possibly 25% of your food source, which would be like the oaks and stuff. Is that kind of a problem?
Yeah, it can be. And that's why I tried to stay away from it. Cause if you've got 40 acres of trees that you want to cut, you don't want to hinge cut in that. You just want to select cut, get money back, and then leave certain, maybe like acorn bearing trees that the deer will be able to still use. Otherwise you're you're definitely taking out trees that are going to help the deer more than they would on the ground.
I appreciate you walking us through all the habitat stuff. That stuff's fascinating. If Joe Biden gives me a good tax cut enough one year, I might be a landowner. But it doesn't seem to be in my near future. So
that's the thing though, is for some reason, there's a lot of people that either send emails or like ask on TikTok, y'all need to talk about habitat management. And we're like, the only habitat management we've ever done is like bring a weed eater out there and like weed eat around like the corn feeder or your stand or something like that.
Yeah. We're not allowed to bait in Wisconsin though. So that's a little different.
Legally.
I guess legally.
That's funny. No, so I know you had a really successful season this last season. So talk me through a little bit, maybe in chronological order of kind of how your last season laid out and kind of what went into when you started scouting, what your strategy was, what you were going after, and then kind of how it ended up.
Yeah, so it was a new game for me this last year just because we had just bought the farm. So right away getting it ready was tough. I mean, it was already laid out decent, but the access trails he had were not good. So I had to do a ton of redoing the access for the ATVs and everything. I had to set up like 15 ladder stands on the property, which takes a long time putting those things together. It takes like 30, 45 minutes each stand, putting them together, let alone hanging them, picking good spots. So just like the typical, you buy a new farm, you have to do all the improvements right away.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I've never done it.
But that's the best part about it, right? And then I added probably 7 acres worth of food plots. And then I had 2 acres worth of corn and beans left out from the farmer. So I wanted it to be like ready to hunt the first year. So I didn't do any TSI or logging because I didn't want to make any improvements that would worsen the hunting or or help the neighbors more than it would us. So that was something that I kind of waited on. I just wanted to see how it hunted that first year with the improvements that I did make, and then kind of go from there and create a plan. But yeah, so right away I had cameras out come July, and I started getting a lot of nice deer on camera. One cool buck, and then he ended up having like 14 points as a 3-year-old, and probably would have went like 150-ish. And that was one that stuck out to me right away, because I knew that if he got one more year, he could be a giant. So
did you say you had a 153-year-old?
Yeah.
They are different. They are different up there. You liar.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool deer. And I ended up passing that one with my bow. That was probably the toughest pass of my life in October. And I think we had 17 different 3-year-old plus bucks on camera on 220 acres by the time October rolled around. So that was way different than coming from northeastern Wisconsin. I maybe had like 5 or 6 each year on 550 acres. So getting a plan to hunt it was pretty easy with the right wind and all the different stand locations that I had set up. But the buck that I ended up shooting, I actually never had on camera until the night before. And I was lucky because I took off work. I was working at a plumbing shop actually this fall. So I took off that Thursday and Friday to go out and hunt. It was like November 3rd through the 7th or 8th I had taken off. So I was heading out there, got the notification that buck showed up, and I was like, oh, that's a pretty nice buck. So the next morning I set up in an area that was probably 100 yards from where he was. Never saw anything. It was like a super uneventful sit. And then that evening I went back, decided to put a decoy out, a buck decoy, just to see what would happen. I had no prior experience with decoys really. But right after I got into the stand, I blew out a really nice deer. He came in from the total wrong direction, got my wind, blew out. And then about 5 minutes later, I was calling my buddy and I was like, God damn it, I just spooked a giant out of here. I was like, I'm such an idiot. I should not have been in this stand right now. And as I hung up, I looked down and there's a doe down below me, because I was kind of in an elevated field looking down into a bedding area with a food plot down in there. And I was looking down there, and all of a sudden she runs off, and that was when the buck that I ended up shooting came out. And at first I didn't think it was anything big. I thought maybe it was a 2.5, because he had a super small body actually, because he had just been running so hard. So I didn't even grab my binos or anything. And then finally he kind of stepped into an opening at like 80 yards. And that was when I realized, like, oh, that's a pretty nice buck. So grabbed my bow, and I didn't know how big he was. I knew he was a nice buck. He chased her up through some super thick, like berry brush and stuff to like 15 yards. And then I just shot him right there at 15 yards and he just dropped. But yeah, that one ended up going 160. And that was my biggest buck I've ever shot.
You want to describe that buck a little bit for the people listening?
So it was just a clean 10-pointer. I guess he went 155 and 4/8, but he had busted off like a 3-inch kicker on his base and then his G4. So he would have been a 160 mainframe 10. But he was like 18.5 wide, 7.5 brow on one side, 7-inch on the other. It was actually a pretty cool buck. I've got videos of him on TikTok and Instagram and stuff, but it was actually his frame similar to like Dustin Huff's buck, I would say, but just like 3 years and like 70 inches smaller. But pretty cool. I actually got his mount back already, which is pretty cool.
Quick turnaround.
Yeah, I got it back in 5 weeks.
Dang. How many $100 bills do you have to send that guy?
Say.
$1,200.
Move you up to the front of the list real quick then, huh?
Yeah. 12. It was a pretty cool pedestal mount that I got done with that.
Oh, nice.
But, and then I was able to shoot a 6.5-year-old buck with my gun. up on our 550 acre farm in gun season as well, which was pretty cool. That was my oldest deer I've ever killed.
That's awesome. I know Wisconsin has like over 600,000 people that freaking hunt, and a lot of people gun hunting. Is it hard to get age on deer up there?
Yeah. And it all depends. I mean, for a lot of people at 3.5, like 120 to 130, they're shooting it. But the more north you go,
that's speaking my language.
I was gonna say,
the more north you go, like the more basket rack and like forks and spikes are getting shot, and that's pretty typical because a lot of people just own like a 40 up there. So they're shooting like the first thing that moves up there, which is like our 550 acre farm. All around that, people are shooting whatever moves. So it's pretty tough to get a good age structure in the deer herd.
Do you all like communicate with your neighbors on your private pieces at all?
I've tried to. It's easier in Western Wisconsin because everybody seems to QDM and do stuff like that. So it's easy to tell your neighbors like, hey, I've got this buck on camera. I'm not going to shoot him. And like with that 14 pointer, I had done that with my neighbors. I kind of told them like, I'm not going to shoot this deer if he walks out. I don't expect you to pass him if you don't want to, but just letting you know I'm not going to shoot that deer. So I think it's a good thing as long as your neighbors are somewhat in the same realm. But if you're showing them a buck that they're going to shoot and you know they're going to shoot, I would not recommend. Yeah, I would not recommend showing them that because they're going to be hunting your property line pretty soon. But yeah, it can help sharing with your neighbors as long as they're somewhat on the same page as you are.
That made me think of our buddy Jake. He was hunting a 4.5-year-old buck that was mid 170s, 12 pointer to like mainframe, and he went up to he has like 5 neighbors, and he like a few of them agreed to pass that deer, and the deer was living on our buddy's property. So he was like, listen, I'm the guy that holds the key right now. I could shoot this deer. I've got video of him, and I've passed him, and they were like, yeah, we'll pass him. And then one of the neighbors was like, I'm not going to. And he has a stand like overhanging his fence. And opening day of rifle in Oklahoma, he shoots that deer. And 4.5-year-old rack, they claimed that the deer was 184 inches. I think it was a mid 170s.
Dude,
this thing, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I'm going to try to pop up a picture real quick.
We'll send you a video of it on Instagram. But this deer was just nuts. And I was sitting back thinking about it. I was like, let's say this is a mid 170s 4-year-old typical. That very well could be like a state record typical at 5.5 or at 6.5, assuming the deer put on 25, 30 inches in between 3 and 4. And it was just like first day of rifle. You want to talk about neighbors. Oh, that was brutal.
Yeah, that was with that 14 pointer. That was kind of the same scenario. I remember it was the second to last day of our 9-day gun season, and that buck got shot, which kind of sucked. And he was pretty cool. I think he claimed it was 159 inches with a broken tine. But there's no way. When I saw him, he had everything, and he was maybe 150.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a lot of points and a lot of cool character to him. But no 160, I don't think.
Yeah, that's funny. So while Jake's looking for that photo,
I got it.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, I just sent it to him on Insta.
Oh yeah, check that out right quick. Let me know what you think. I remember when I got that video, I was like, first of all, why are you passing this deer? Why is there a video of this? Why is this deer not dead?
There's no reason why. It still says sending. I don't understand. Did you block us, Noah? Is that it?
No.
All right, you should get it now.
Oh my gosh. It didn't look real when I got a picture of it. I was like, which fence did that come out of?
That's pretty crazy.
It looks like like one of them South Texas deer, like in the Senderos or whatever it is. That's what it looked like to me.
That's pretty crazy.
I just don't understand how something that big and that symmetrical can like keep all those tines like healthy.
So what is a deer like that? What would that weigh in Texas where you're at? Or is that in Oklahoma?
That's an Oklahoma deer. I've only killed one deer in Texas. I primarily hunt Oklahoma because Texas is like 98% private land and the public land system sucks here.
They like fences.
Yeah, and the high fence culture is huge down here. But that deer in Oklahoma, so I shot a 7.5-year-old 13 point this year, and it was actually big. That was a 230 that's not field dressed. So 180,
190,
190. Yeah,
that's pretty big though. That's like what we get here.
But really. I know you probably won't believe it, but the body sizes in Southwest Oklahoma are like night and day difference from the eastern part of Oklahoma. Like if you get into the southeast, you're talking Labradoodles with horns, and then you go northeast and it's just like a little bit bigger, maybe like a German Shepherd, kind of like you're talking about. But yeah,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah, like the bigger buck that I had shot this year, that one only went 155 or 160 dressed out, which is super small. The one that I shot in gun season dressed out at like 210. So that would have been like 250 on the hoof, around there.
Gosh, dang.
No, we've legitimately seen some 120-pound field dress deer.
Yeah, I've never seen one of those. The one I shot this year was probably one of the smaller 4-year-olds I've ever seen.
Well, you throw about 160-inch rack on a 120-pound body, and it looks like a state record.
Yeah.
How much do you think Justin's deer weighed?
115, 120. I shot a doe this year that was bigger than a 160-inch buck that my uncle shot. 100%. Don't you think, Jake? When you got the head off this deer, you looked at it, you're like, oh, nice doe. And then there's a 165-inch rack on a cooler. You're like,
yeah,
it's nuts.
We went to the taxidermist to pick up Christie's buck he shot in October, and we held that deer, Southwest deer, to a eastern deer, and like I promise you, compared to that Southwest deer, like the 160-incher looked like a fawn. Like it was really crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mountain deer. It's nuts.
So did you shoot that one on public then?
I didn't shoot my deer this year on public. I shot a freaking dink in Kansas on public. That was my only public deer this year. We've shot some pretty, as a group. I mean, I'm talking about 4 or 5 people. We've got some pretty good ones over the years on public, but seems like every other year, you shoot a pretty good one on public. If in a 5-year period of time I could shoot 2 good deer on public, I'd be like, yeah, doing pretty good. It's tough to do consistently.
Is the pressure pretty crazy down there? Is it?
Oh my gosh. Oklahoma has become one of the most popular over-the-counter states. And that's just because we have such good regulations for over-the-counter. 1, it's extremely cheap. 2, you get 2 buck tags as a non-resident, and they're not bound to any zone or anything. So you could get a good piece of public and kill 2 of the bucks on it. So yes, it has been exponentially worse than it used to be.
There's quite a few Florida hunters. Like last 2 seasons, yeah, it seems like we've seen more out-of-staters than we do Oklahoma tags.
Yeah,
really,
a lot of folks like that. Yeah, that's going to be us in Wisconsin this year.
Yep.
Wisconsin's pretty packed lately, but you can still pretty easily get it done if you know the right area and what you're doing on the public. But
does Wisconsin have a 1 buck limit or a 1 buck limit?
So you get one bow tag you can use all year long, and then you get one gun season tag or muzzle loader tag. So the gun tag is gun or muzzle loader, or rifle or muzzle loader. But let's say you want to shoot your gun tag with the bow, you can do that. You can like technically class down. So like you could shoot 2 bow bucks in a year as long as you shot it with a gun tag in gun season. But typically like 2 tags. Yeah.
So you can't shoot one with like a muzzleloader and then one with the rifle?
No.
See, I like that. And I think that's where Oklahoma kind of faults a little bit, because there's a lot of people that, and again, I guess there's nothing wrong with it. But I feel like the majority of the people feel their first buck tag with the muzzleloader and then the second one with the rifle. And those are relatively pretty close to the rut. And I mean, heck, rifle season's smack dab in the middle of like peak rut here. And so it's really hard and really frustrating, especially like around private land, when you're like, oh, you're chasing a good one all year. You watch it through the summer. And then literally it's just like, as soon as it starts getting good and it actually cools down, you look on Facebook and you're like, oh, there he is.
That's right.
No, ours isn't too bad. We luckily have gun season typically after the rut, towards the end of the rut. So I know Missouri's got their gun season in the rut, which can take a pretty big hit on your deer herd, but we're pretty lucky with that, I would say.
Yeah, you make your rifle hunters earn it out in the cold. I like that. That's awesome. So we talked about a lot of habitat stuff. We talked about your season. One of the questions that's kind of a little off the wall, that are different, that we've been asking specifically for this series is, if you had to boil down all the success that you and maybe the people closest to you have had into like a single word, like what would that word be? So how would you sum up a successful season? What does it take? Like, we've had people say it's hunting smart. I know that's 2 words. That one doesn't count. Or obsession, or passion, or year round hyphenated. That could be 1 word. What would your word be?
Probably just like drive, I would say. You got to have a good drive, whether you're hunting public, and this applies to everybody. You can't just, like, let's say you miss a deer opening weekend or second week or something. You can't like kick yourself and not go out the next weekend. You got to have the right drive. You got to be willing to take time off if you can. You got to keep hunting, even you just have to be like adaptable as well. If you've got a property that doesn't hunt well with the south wind, go find another one. There's public within an hour of everybody. You can go hunt a spot there and shoot a nice deer as long as there's one there. Just having the right drive is a big thing. Like, I had probably hunted, I don't even know how many sits this year before I shot my bow buck, and all day sits as well. I mean, it just doesn't happen like with the snap of your finger. You just got to be in the tree to make it happen.
Are you the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson fan?
The Rock?
Yeah.
No. I mean, I guess
that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen his movies, but I don't follow him too well.
I didn't know where he was going with that either, so it's fine.
It's okay.
No, so even though this series is called Successful Seasons, and obviously you had one, we also like asking people a question that, or I guess not a question, but like, we had this little mini series called like Close But No Cigar, where people talk about where even if they didn't do anything wrong or something, you had an encounter with the deer, or you had a shot opportunity and it just didn't go in your favor. The stars didn't align. So do you have a moment, and it could be from years back, what's your biggest Close But No Cigar moment?
So I had one this year, right after I had tagged out on my buck. I went out the next day. I told my cousin to get up here because I had some daylight movement with some nice bucks. So he drove out from Minnesota, and we were hunting that next evening, and I was just filming him. And we had a really nice 9-point, probably 150-inch 4-year-old come out, and that deer my dad had seen like 3 times in daylight. My uncle had seen once in daylight a couple of days prior. So it was just, he came through. I did a grunt or 2, and I was just hoping he would come up, but he was just on a doe and wasn't really necessarily going to leave her. So I guess that was probably a pretty close scenario we got this year. We got to like 60 yards of that deer. I've got plenty of other ones that I've like messed up on a shot or went in with the wrong wind. I mean, I've got probably more fails than I do successes, and I'm sure everybody has that. But
60 yards isn't close enough to send an arrow?
Not. So he has never shot anything too big. So I looked over at him and I was like, if he comes into 40, are you going to shoot? And I looked at him and he was literally just shaking and his knees were bucking. I'm like, dude, I don't even know if you can hit this thing at 20 yards. But definitely not going to shoot at 60. He's just like a typical hunts 1 or 2 weekends of the year with the bow and doesn't like practice a ton with his bow where he'd feel comfortable at 40 or 50. But yeah, he was not in the right mindset to shoot at that deer at that point in time.
Well, I can't blame him. This past season, we were down on Oklahoma Public, and we've been getting our butts kicked for like 5-6 days into this trip. And it was like it was the second to last morning before we were going to leave and head to Kansas. And I was having a terrible morning. I was running late to the spot. I get halfway to my tree, and I was like, I don't have my bino harness. And if I don't have my bino harness, I can't range the deer because my bino harness is tucked in one of the pockets. So I have to go all the way back. And no. I figured out I forgot my release. That's what it was. And then when I got to the truck, I realized I seen my bino harness sitting in the seat, and I was like, I'm an idiot. So 2 birds, 1 stone, went back to the tree, and it was just now starting to get a little bit daylight as I start climbing the tree. And I take my backpack off, and I hear deer yelling at me, telling me I'm being too loud. And I'm like, I know, just give me a minute. And I get like 3 sticks up in the tree, and I go to reach for my platform, and I have my platform like gear tied to the side of my saddle. And when I went to reach for it, it falls, and luckily there's a big old rock right underneath my tree, and so it just started clinging on that thing. And then the deer, probably 70 yards further than when I first heard it blow, yelled at me again. And at this point, I was just like, I'm about to just go back to my truck and take a nap. But I set everything up, pulled my bow up. I didn't have any of my camera equipment set up yet, because I was like, I just got to take a minute and just, let some
cool down.
Out. Exactly. And I sat there like 15 minutes, and by this time it's purely daylight. And I say all that to say this: there's a buck coming in that actually came in 25 yards. And when I seen this deer, like, I was not in the right mindset, and I tried to range it, and I couldn't range it. Like, it was going 74, 25, 35, just everywhere. So I ended up soaring an arrow over the dang thing's back, but I can understand where he was coming from. Like, even if usually you think you're steady, there's those times where it just gets to you.
Yeah, that'll happen. So you guys are saddle hunters then?
Sadly,
this last year is my first time. So
yeah, I switched over to that like 3 years ago. So that definitely it's night and day going from a climber or a hang on to that. But yeah, I saw some new, I don't know if you pay attention to like the ATA shows and stuff like that, but I saw some cool sticks came out from, I don't know if it's is it Timberline?
Timber Ninja?
I don't know. Timber Ninja, yes. The carbon fiber double step sticks that they have that came out. And those are actually pretty reasonably priced. I think it's like $220 or $230 for a 3-pack. So that seems pretty reasonable.
Sad that's cheap these days.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So hold on. Are you a one? Are you a one sticker or no?
No,
not man enough for it.
I don't understand the concept. I mean, I feel like for one stick, I feel like you have to have like a tree with no branches. I don't know.
I feel 100%.
Like
I can kind of see where you're coming from. Yeah.
And a lot of the places I hunt, that you're not going to find that. And if you do you want to be in a tree with no branches? I don't want to be in a tree with no branches. I'd rather have a lot of cover behind me. So, and I can get up the tree pretty quick with 4 sticks and an 8er, and definitely get high enough with that too. So I don't know. I've never decided to try one sticking.
Yeah. Well, we have a buddy that we've camped by before, and he actually one sticks, and he's kind of shown us how it works. And he looked like he was doing like Pilates hanging from a tree, like trying to reach back and get the stick. And it's just like, listen, I don't know how that's stealthy. I mean, I'm sure if you do it long enough, it can be stealthy, but that, like, in a way, it almost looks silly. But then again, I'm pretty slow at things. So
yeah, I don't know. I can get in pretty quiet and quick with the regular setup I have. So I haven't decided to switch over to that yet.
Right.
If somebody showed me and it was good, then maybe I'd try it. But
this guy that is our hunting camp neighbor, he was like, all right, step one, pull 40 feet of rope out of your bag. I was like, all right, you lost me. there's no way. Like, he pulls it out. It looks like a fireman over his shoulder. I was like, no, dude, I'm not bringing all that.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't you like rappel down too? Is that kind of?
I think so. I think you do. Yeah, and then like there's a way to like take your loop off and it all falls down. I'm like, mm-mm.
As soon as they make the rappel rope like Bluetooth, then I might try it.
Yeah, I've never, like, I don't understand the concept. Like, when you're going up to one stick, do you throw it up and then, like, how do you get the rope around the tree to get up? Or do you just, I don't know. I never understood the concept.
It's weird because they like use their what's it called? The rope that goes around the tree and you would normally saddle hunt. What's it called?
Just the linesman?
Yeah, like alignments or just a regular tether rope. Your tether, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And they like hang from that, but like the 40 foot of rope is basically their tether when they're going up. And I've watched people do it and they're like, all right, then you just go kind of sideways and you grab the stick and then you put it above your head again. And then you climb up the aider. And I'm just like, dude, I'm one greasy fingertip morning away from being like, there goes my whole setup. I'm just like hanging from the tree.
Yeah. I don't know if I could do it. The saddle is easy enough to set up with just 3 or 4 sticks. So I don't think, I don't have the need to do that. Yeah.
No. Well, no, we really appreciate you coming on. For folks that want to connect with you or maybe want to have you do some habitat plan or design layout on their property, where can they connect with you and figure all that stuff out?
Probably just my Instagram handle. You can reach out to that. I've got some stuff in the works. I'm going to be making a website here this week. Well, it's already in the works, but I'm gonna be making a website to be able to start doing my stuff individually and do that. So that'll be up here pretty soon. So I'll have a link to that at some point. But Instagram or email is probably the easiest way to reach me.
And what is your Instagram and email for people that aren't listening to or watching the video?
So my Instagram is Noah Gould 42, and there's like a little the dash between Noah and Gould. And then my email is noahgould165@yahoo.com.
Oh, still using Yahoo. When did you make that sucker? 2003?
Oh, yeah. 2008, probably. I've got a Gmail as well that I use more often for work. But
yeah. Well, there we go. Cool. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for checking out the Hunter's Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.